The first thing is about the general meta frame. I think in the UK, we've had quite a problem, as you can imagine, trying to break out of the reformist, gradualist, collective mentality of the climate movement. In other words, with Just Stop Oil, there's a tendency to say, this is, here's a campaign, why don't you come and join it? As if it's, 2005. So we've been trying to emphasize that we are facing the end of civilization and we've got 2 to 3 years to go. And the phrase I use is, this is a mass scramble to save humanity. It's not a campaign. It's driven by a massive intensity of emotion around, we are the last generation. And I think it's really important to meta frame everything you do in terms of the media and also internal mobilizing that this is it, right? It has a millennium-esque feel about it, because it does. And so that's like the emotion and rhetoric around it, but there's a concretization of that, which is, this is the first and second iteration of a necessary uprising against the capitalist paradigm, class, structure. And unless there's fundamental structural rearrangement in the economy, we're all fucked. So it's the beginning, you need to promote it as the first step towards a civil resistance, 50,000 people in the street, which everyone in France knows what it looks like, right? So it's good to get, when you're talking to people you want to mobilize, it's not like we're going to sit in the street and we're going to get a little thing on insulation. The key argument is we need to have a win in order to mass mobilize. Unless we get a win, we won't be able to get 50,000 people on the street because they don't believe it's possible to change the system. But once you have a win, then that galvanizes the movement. So, there's lots of examples of this, as I'm sure you know, but in the UK, Insulate Britain has re-galvanized the climate movement towards civil resistance. So before Insulate Britain, it was, disappearing into gradualist sort of rabbit holes of, we can just pretend we can carry on, which is this mass delusion in the climate movement that we just do what we've done in the past. And what Insulate Britain was saying, no, this is a glimmer of what civil resistance looks like. So you can, it's good to mention the third iteration, which is €500,000, 300 people being employed, for 5,000-10,000 arrestable people within 10 weeks. And that's what I'm working on in terms of funders around the world. Because what I'm saying to the funders is, are you fucking serious? We're going to overthrow the system on £100,000 grant, right? Like we need 2 million euros per country to do this if we're going to be serious about the next, 10,000 generations. And obviously they're going to get that because we've got the data, but we know we can do it. And of course, the argument is going to be the bad guys have got hundreds of millions of euros, right? The fossil fuel industry is plowing all this money in and has been for 30 years, as we all know. So there's no surprise the climate movement hasn't been able to be at all successful because we're piddling around with no money and no people, right? You see what I mean? So there has to be like this grand vision, and the vision is massively powerful in terms of mobilization. If I do 4 or 5 talks a week, if I just go to an audience and say, hey, we're blocking motorways to get a bit of insulation, it's like, oh yeah, cool. It's like, no, this is the end of the fucking world. And this is the plan, right? And if you've got a better plan, fine. But this is the only plan in France at the moment, right? And they go, oh, right, this is something, and they start feeling inspired. So that's something to put. You can't, obviously you've got to be able to persuade people with all the nuts and bolts, but you have to provide that vision of some way out of hell. And once people believe there's a vision to get us out of hell, that's when you get the mass mobilization moment, which you saw within, you saw that with XR with 50,000 people joining in 4 weeks of the April 2019 rebellion. Those 50,000 people joined, not because someone gave them a leaflet, right? Because they had a vision of some sort of change, as we all know. So that's one thing. Sorry, I'm rambling on a bit. The group. So you sort of were a little bit vague, but you want to be super not vague on you are in charge. The 6 of you are in charge, right? There's an executive. So if you muddy the waters, you're just asking for problems further down the road. This is a project that is created by the 6 of you. You own that project. If you want to be involved, then you have to follow this plan. If you don't like that, then there's 101 other networks in France to join, right? And what your position is that you have the last say. You have the last say on which working groups are created, whether someone's asked to leave, whether to close down a working group, on top level strategy. And because you're smart, you're delegating, operational aspects to the working groups. So you've got the best of both worlds. We want to make that clear to people because we know that as soon as you get to scale, the horizontalist culture will start, seeping in, and lots of people want to be participating in high-level strategy. Right? High-level strategy is your preserve, and if people don't want to do that, then they can, there's plenty of other places to go. And every civil resistance episode involves a vanguard of key designers and leaders who basically pursue that through the process, right? So that needs to be in there. You just have to, take hold of your own power, because you're obviously all cool guys, right? And you've got the collective intelligence of 6 people. So, if one of you goes a bit weird, that's okay. There's 5 of you to pull the 6th person in, right? You see what I mean? It's not a dictatorship. It's a collective intelligence project of serious activists that sort of know the literature, blah, blah, blah. So that's that little thing. The thing with the media is, we're all middle-class activists, right? Before, I presume everyone's had a university education, right? The world is not going to be changed by polite middle-class university activists, right? And I shouldn't really need to say this to French political culture. The world is changed by people being fucking mad as hell and showing it on the media, right? So you should be looking at Larry Kramer, for instance, in the US. So Larry Kramer turned around, acted up like in 2 years from a load of middle-class waffle to a high-level emotional, outrage culture. And there's lots of research on outrage. And the single biggest determinant of success was Larry Kramer's emotionality, right? Get in the streets, otherwise you're going to fucking die. So what was massively successful, in my opinion, potentially even more successful than sitting in the motorways, was the decision by Insulate Britain not to answer any questions. And the beauty of not answering any questions is that then you can design exactly what you're going to say in the studio, because it doesn't matter what they say. And you want to find your most emotional, charismatic, ideally working class recruit to go in there and say, you had 30 years to ask the right questions. You're still not asking the right questions. We're facing 3 to 4 years until the destruction of this country. This is what needs to be done. Are you stupid? Are you scared, right? So you turn around all the, you're the one asking the questions. You're the person in control. The elites have betrayed the French people by ignoring the Citizens' Assembly. Now it's our time. Your time is gone, right? So with Just Stop Oil, all the spokespeople will be between 18 and 21. So they'll be the new generation, right? They'll have no old guys like me on. Right? And they're going to go in there and jump on the tables and glue themselves to the cameras, right? You see what I mean? It has to be like fucking full on, because this is what gets the attention, and obviously you need to train for that, right? This is a big paradigm shift. It's probably the biggest paradigm shift. And it's one of the biggest reasons the climate change movement has failed, because we're too soft. right? No one, I'm not talking about anyone hitting anyone, right? Just to be clear, but there's loads of ways to get attention when you're on Good Morning France or whatever you have, right? Anyway, so that's something, you know, I've just done a document on the role playing, so potentially I'll send that to you, because that's concretely, that's the way to do stuff. On the action side of it, I think you've got legitimate considerations, and all I would say on that is there's a power law curve distribution of effectiveness of actions, right? In other words, like there's 3 or 4 types of actions that will get you the attention of 60, 70, 80% of the French public, and there's about 500 types of actions which have 0 chance of getting any attention. Right? So you have to be ruthlessly aware that you have to block motorways. That's it, right? There's only 2 or 3 types of actions. And if you've only got a few people, motorways is the only game in town, with the possible exception of hunger strikes, right? So it doesn't matter, you know, you mustn't water that down. And, you know, we all know there's a big debate about disrupting the public, but we know with absolute clarity that unless you're getting the attention of the country, you're not in the ballpark of getting anywhere. So I presume you know that. With the mobilization then, which is the last sort of thing, is, yeah, it's important. This is a general point in what you were saying, like on a lot of the things you were saying, you were going, well, we could do this and we could do that. So that's not good enough. What you need to make decisions, right? When you make a decision, that doesn't mean you can't change that decision, but you do need to make a decision, because once you've made a decision, then you can communicate in your mobilization with clarity. And you can always say you might change that decision. So at Insulate Britain, we made a decision really early on, you know, on various things, and then we changed the decision, but that was fine. But you have, when you're going out on your tour, you have to be super clear. People aren't interested in whether you've got a little issue with this, an issue with that, right? Cognitively, they just want to hear what's going on. You know, what's the name? What's the demand? What's the mobilization plan? What's the action plan? That's all they want to know. They don't want to know that you're having a bit of a discussion about it. So I think in order to get, this is probably the biggest thing in terms of getting the grant, you just need to make those decisions. So you do need to make a decision what you're going to do in terms of your reaction, and you do need to make a decision on what the demand is going to be, you know, and change it if needs be. So in terms of the mobilization, you need to put down the maths, right? It's not good enough to say, we're going to go out and do talks around France, right? Because you're not holding yourself accountable. You have to be accountable to the funders and to each other. So you have to say, there's 5 of us, we will do 4 meetings a week for 10 weeks. At each meeting, we'll recruit 2 people, which is 80 people recruited, right? So then you can hold yourself to a timeline. Now, if that's not working out because of objective problems, then that's fine. No one's going to give you a hard time, but you have to have a concrete plan, which has numbers in it. You see what I mean? So every application has got the numbers in, and then we can have a look at it. And if you're not fulfilling that plan, then, you know, we need to investigate why, and we can give you support, and you can talk to Henning about, you know, where he puts the biscuits in his meetings or something, you know, all the micro design stuff, right? But we need to be able to identify if there's a problem. The other thing is about mobilization. Obviously, like we started off with strong empirical evidence that you can go to XR groups, or you can go to the Rebellion of One people, and they will sort out a meeting in Lyon for you, right? So then it's pretty easy to get 10, 15, 20 people in Lyon, because you know 5 people there, and they'll spread it amongst their networks. And for the sake of argument, you know, 15 of the 30 people come to a follow-up meeting, and 5 of them will sign up to sit in the motorway, let's say. So that's, you know, that's a good model. But the other thing I want to emphasize is this whole international project. One of the fantastic things about it is its ability to transfer concrete mobilization information in real time. So instead of finding out half a year later that mobilization of students is a good idea in the UK, I can send you 10 minutes after this meeting the latest micro design for mobilizing students, right? And in other words, like, everyone can learn from each other in real time. So again, if you go out to Lyon and you do some X, right, and it works really well, you can send that to Connie and Rodri, and within a week, the people in Sydney can be doing the same thing. But it's all statistically led, right? We don't want to know from you that you went to Lyon and you had a good meeting. That means nothing, right? What we want to know is you did X and that led to more people, 20 people signing up rather than 10 people. So for instance, like in the UK, we do a first meeting, right? And then we're asking people to go to the non-violence training, and about 10% of people were turning up. So then we had a design challenge of how to get more people from the first meeting to the non-violence training, right? So then we instituted a follow-up meeting, but the follow-up meeting was micro-designed so that the first thing you say when you're doing your talk is the first of 2 meetings, right? So you've meta-framed the space so that people understand they're going to 2 meetings. So as a result of that and a number of other micro designs, now 50% of the people are going to a second meeting. And we know that if people go to 2 meetings, 80% of them will go to the MVDA. So we've gone from 10% of people going to the MVDA to 30–40% of people going to MVDA, purely through micro design elements, right? This is the heart of the project. Because as we've established, and I've been saying this, since the beginning of XR, is the revolution is going to be micro designed, right? There's no point going out on low resolution, hey, the system's shit, let's, all rise up. You need to have 100 micro design elements, which will bring people to the street. Okay, so just on that, I will send you the student mobilization, and I would encourage you to have two mobilization projects to do the geographical meetings and also the student meetings. The student meetings are fantastically effective, given the micro design we're doing, which is to cut out all the bureaucracy and go on the campuses and do leafleting, and then occupy a space, don't ask any permission, and have a meeting. And they went from 20 people in a meeting through to 120 people in a meeting in 3 weeks in Edinburgh. So, and that's all through using this micro design. So once you've got 120 students in the room, times that by 100 universities, you're into getting your 5,000 students out onto the motorways. And they're keen to do it, right? But what I would say, and I say this to all the groups, right? One of the biggest errors groups make is to get their egos attached to demands, right? The demand is actually the least important part of the project. I mean, it has to be good enough, right? It has to tick the boxes, it has to be doable, it has to be popular, it has to be concrete, right? But within that criteria, there's a whole bunch of valid demands. So it's very easy, I'm sure you've had all experiences of sitting in rooms where people try and decide demands and all fall out with each other. The main thing is that you don't fall out. Because I said this to the Italians, right? Because they were a little bit shaky. And I said, your number one priority is to all love each other and be cool with each other, right? Because if you fall out, you're all fucked, right? So the main thing is you just let go and just have internal democracy and have a vote on it, right? If it needs to be, and just accept that you could be wrong. If one of you might have, an idea and you all vote against it, and that person might turn out to be right. You don't know, it's the way it is. So the main thing is you just accept that it's difficult and you don't quite know, but you just get the decision made. I mean, it took them 3 months to make a decision in Australia. I was pulling my hair out, I was saying, make a fucking decision, guys. You know, it's all right, because they were just getting, you know, like this. You know, it's okay. The main thing is the mobilization, right? Because you can have as sexy a demand as you like, but if you haven't got the mobilization, no one's going to give a damn. Yeah. Well, that's a really interesting design challenge, as it were. So what, again, we sort of broke with XR orthodoxy by deciding the strategy team, the people in the strategy team, i.e. the central executive, as it were, don't have any formal roles. And the reason for this is quite like radical, really, which is that the reason you're all in the strategy team is because you're all got an overall intelligence around how to actually, you know, win. You see what I mean? And what you're doing is you're not representing a silo. You're not representing a special interest in the system. Your job is to represent the whole strategic, overall strategic decision making. In other words, like the biggest problem, as you know, in XR is siloization, right? And people tend to just think about their little patch. Oh, I'm just doing media, you know, and I'm just doing mobilization. And that's disastrous because it doesn't create ambition of strategic analysis. Because you think, you know, if you're in media, you think, oh, I can't do that because nothing is happening in the other silos. And the other silos go, well, we can't do that because media wouldn't really support it. What your role is to do, what your role collectively is to create a new ultra radical imagination, which then empowers the whole system, you know, inspires it. And you can't do that with having a bureaucratic role. So that's the romanticism of it, I might say, okay? But it's true, right? You know, this is how revolutions are created, by enormous naivety and ambition. It's like, this is what we're going to do. We're going to save, you know, we're going to save this country, we're going to save the next generation. How are we going to do it? We're going to do it like this. And then you work this coherent strategy out, you know? So for instance, like with Insulate Britain, we were saying, we're going to block the motorways, right? Okay, so that was ultra ambitious. And then we decided we were not going to answer any of the questions in the media. Now, once you do both those things, those two radical moves support each other. But if you made the decision independent of each other, they'd look a bit stupid. But if you say, hey, we're going to block motorways and we're going to take over the studios, it starts to have some coherence. You see how that works? So that's one side of the equation. And then as a sort of boring bureaucrat side of me would say, yes, you do need to have a reality check that comes through data from your particular area of coordination. So if one of you is, you know, discussing media, is in the media group and coordinating media, then obviously that person should input some data from the media saying, look, I've only got 5 people, I can't do 20 interviews a day, so that sort of thing, right? So you have a reality check as well. So what I think what we've decided in the UK is a sort of hybridization of the two positions, which is formally in the strategy group, no one has a role, but we all know Indigo is in the action system. We all know Roger's in the mobilization system, you see what I mean? So we bring to the table a certain level of detailed knowledge about the capacity of those different areas. So yeah, it's a really good question actually, because yeah. But I think, you know, having everyone together going, how are we actually going to do this, is the essence of what this project is about, really. It's analytically illiterate to say that blocking motorways doesn't create mobilization, right? And the fundamental analytical error people make is to assume that when they say people, they mean like a single entity, right? People are always a distribution curve. Some people think you're okay, some people hate you, and some people love you, right? So you've got the two long tails. Some people love you, some people hate you. That's like an immutable law of sociology. There's always a normal distribution. People don't always think the same thing, right? There's always two tails on any issue. So the critical analysis, which, you know, people make a mistake on all the time, is they say, people are going to get pissed off with you sitting in the motorways. What they mean is 70% of the population is going to be pissed off with you. 29% of the population is broadly supporting you, and 1% of the population thinks you're fucking brilliant, right? That's analysis one. Analysis two is that 1% will then gravitate towards mobilization, right? So it means that you'll have 20, 60 people in a room rather than 10, right? And then the third analysis is if you have 3,000, 10,000 arrests in France through discipline non-violence, you will produce legislative change. So the fundamental analysis is you don't need the whole population to create legislative change, right? You know, everyone knows that in the literature. Only 1% of the French population engaged in the French Revolution, for God's sake, right? Everyone else was in the fields hoeing and praying to God, right? So this is a fundamental like misunderstanding about how political change works. And there's good reasons to believe the French Revolution was produced by 300 individuals, if you've read the literature, right? So so, you know, obviously analytically, that's what you can say to people. But as we all know, you know, most conventional activists and left-wing people are too set in their ways to understand that. But in terms of the data, before Insulate Britain, we had 10 people doing mobilisation. Afterwards, we had 60 people. And now we've got about 100 people doing mobilisation, and we've got about 30 full-time people doing mobilisation. So not only did it bring more people in to do mobilisation, it also enabled us to raise £250,000, right? So the first iteration raised about 20,000. We raised about 70,000 during the campaign. But those are the two major determinants of mobilisation: is people working full-time and money to pay them. So as a consequence, now we've got nearly 500 people signed up for the next iteration. And we've got 6 weeks to go. So that's irrefutable evidence of success. In terms of what we're actually trying to do, the fundamental thing we're trying to do here is change the legislation. Public opinion is a means to that end. It's not an end in itself. This is the fundamental point, right? Changing the French population is not going to reduce carbon emissions. The only thing that will reduce carbon emissions is legislation by the French government. That's the prize, not the public, right? You see how that works. So this is the understanding you have to have internally in the group, and also when you mobilize people. If it's a big global story, then we all know from demonstration effects that you could have a Zoom call and you could suddenly have 300 French people on a Zoom call, because they'll all be going, holy fuck, this is great. You know, this is what I've been looking for. We need to be doing stuff in France. And then you need to have a rapid integration process. So that on the first week, you've got 30, 40 people who are going the motorway. And, you know, 10 days later, you could have 300 people, because they've all seen, you know, all these students in the UK just wandering around the M25. You see what I mean? So you have to plan for success, right? You have to plan for nonlinear growth. So you need to have that in your plan. You don't need to do it now, but how you plan for nonlinear success is rapidly simplifying your systems, right? You know, everyone in France knows how to do that because you're experts at it, right? You know, it's like one day nothing's happening, 10 days later, everything's happening, right? So you just need a minimal amount of organization, a Zoom call, a briefing, a motorway to go to, you know, a press release, right? Those are the essential elements. So you need to work on that as a little plan, and obviously to have your spokespeople and your demand